I'm most honored today to have with me the distinguished Roger Fisher, perhaps one of the most preeminent of our field. Dr. Fisher, welcome.
Thank you. Roger's a good name.
Roger.
I don't use the doctor. As long as they know I'm a professor, that's all right.
There you go. All right. Professor Fisher, you are the director of the Harvard Negotiation Project and a Williston Professor of Law Emeritus at Harvard. Came to Harvard in 1958 after having graduated from there 10 years earlier in 1948.
That's right.
Just the very briefest of highlights for the record, okay, is that prior to that time that you had been very involved in international law and international conflict. You had participated in some of the most important events of the last century, the Iranian hostage negotiations in 1981, and then also were one of the primary architects for the approach to the negotiations in the Camp David Accords.
Well, yeah, my field has been dealing with differences. And how do you do that? Negotiation, I see not as adversarial, but as joint problem solving. How do we deal with our differences? And that's one of the field. Many negotiators think of it as adversary, haggling over the price of goods in the market, whatever you're doing. And I'm treating negotiation as two people that have worked together, sitting side by side as we are. Yes. We have a job to do. Let's do that job. And
that's going to be very, very critical, because it seems to me that, and we're going to have to go back and look at that, is that prior to your beginning to formulate an overall systematic approach to negotiation, that was largely the view of what negotiation was about.
I think lawyers treated negotiation as an adversary activity, like litigation. You go there litigating. So if I'm negotiating with you, I'm playing my cards and holding them close to my chest and representing, and I'm trying to say, hey, we have a shared concern here, a shared problem. Let's work on this together. How do you see it? How do I see it?
And you framed, I think, then very, very neatly what we're going to want to look at, because this seems to be both historically, intellectually, the shift that you have been one of the primary people responsible
I think
for
that's
having
right.
come about.
I remember one of my students from the Kennedy School became, Jamil Mawad became elected president of Ecuador. And he called me up and said, Roger, I won the election yesterday. Come down. Now what do I do? I'm president of Ecuador. And I said, nothing like having an A student run for office and be president. And secondly, have an asked for my advice. That's perfect. So I went down. I said, well, you know, last president of Ecuador refused to talk to President Fujimori of Peru. He said, no, I'm going to meet him. What's the purpose of that meeting? I said, what do you think the purpose of that meeting is? He said, well, I want to find out all about him. I said, if you come with your FBI interrogating questions, I'm afraid you're going to clam up. Get him to know about you. Lay your cards on the table. Say, my best question is ask his advice. He said, ask the advice of the opposing president? I said, yes. How do we deal with our differences? We've had 50 years of warfare back and forth. What's your advice? He said, that's going to floor him. And I said, well, that indicates I want your help in how we deal with our problems. And I said, I want a picture taken. There'll be a picture taken of us shaking hands. I said, no. I want to picture the two of you sitting side by side. Both of you look at the same piece of paper, both of you working together.
Well, I'm going to struggle to keep up with you in this interview, but I'm going to at least insist on getting through making sure that your accomplishments are well known for the record, because then I need to come back to exactly that. I think that is the most critical part.
I'll try.
Well, that's fine. That's fine.
Person.
No, that's exactly what I'd like. And in fact, I must, however, say is when I have judges, I do like to tell them that this is the only time I get to tell them what to do, as opposed to as a lawyer. And I say the same thing to you now as a professor. Because it brings us to this piece. Now you have done a considerable amount of consulting throughout the world. And of course your book, Getting to Yes, getting to agreements without giving in, with Bill Urey and Bruce
Patton
is perhaps remains one of the bestsellers, is translated into how many languages?
Maybe 20.
20 languages, and virtually everybody who knows anything about this field has looked at that book as a primer.
Well,
It, for the first time, outlined what it is we're hopefully trying to do as negotiators.
But one of the best things was its advice to both sides. Much earlier advice to a negotiator was that how to bluff, how to mislead, how to conceal your interests. And this is saying, no, if you want to meet your interests, let people know your interests. Be honest about it. Let's work this out.
And I'm going to want to talk to you about that too. And again, I'm going to very neatly put that on the shelf. I do want to make certain, though, that we make sure to bookend your career from getting to yes to the newest Beyond Reason, using emotions as you negotiate, that has just most recently come out. So you have not been
That's just
allowed.
out this month or last month.
Okay, so no moss has grown under your feet at this point.
Well, it's a lot of negotiation is very rational.
Yes.
And we say, you want to establish personal rapport. People read that book to realize that you're negotiating as a human being.
Yes.
How do I build rapport? How do I express appreciation for your... Thank you for having me here this morning.
Yes.
People love to be appreciated. I can see you smiling right
Absolutely.
now.
Are you
So
kidding?
First
Sure.
step on building rapport, express
That's right.
appreciation.
That's right.
Then express affiliation. We're here together on this thing, side by
connection.
side, working on this. We're colleagues, not adversaries. And then a little bit of autonomy. I'm not impinging on your autonomy. Ask whatever questions you want. That's fine. But then our status, you have your expertise, I have mine. And my role, your role, I'd like to include giving me advice.
Yes.
So I can always give a little more advice on that.
Okay. Now, that's an old trick you have, is charming me to death. Huh?
It's not a trick. That's building a sense of colleagueship here.
Yes.
I do that with almost
Definitely.
anyone I can,
Yeah.
to say we have a problem together.
Yeah.
Whatever our differences are, let's work on them side by side.
Let me take you back, though, to the beginnings of your career. You didn't start off focusing on negotiation when you first came to Harvard in 1958, and you were working in the area of international law and international relations at that time.
Yeah, I spent first 2 years after law school, I was in Paris with the Marshall Plan. Got married, went over to Paris. We had a lovely time for 2 years, dealing with work on Harriman's staff there.
Now, was that with the real negotiator in the family, Caroline?
She really,
And so everything you really have learned about negotiation,
her,
you
right.
learned from her. Okay. Let's give credit where credit is due. All right.
okay,
All right.
so
Yes.
then I came back. At that time, we met on the boat coming back. Queen Mary, in those days, you sailed, didn't fly, and we had colleagues from one of the partners at Covington and Burling happened to be on the boat and had us at our table for meals, and John Leyland was in the international negotiation field, so he took me away from, when I got to the office, I found he reassigned me to his office rather than on antitrust case, thank God. And so I worked with him on India, Pakistan, on Iran, Afghanistan disputes.
Now, this was back in 1940, 51, 52.
Yeah, 51, 52, 50,
Okay.
51.
Okay.
I stayed there until 56, working mostly on international law problems at the firm, with the partner handled it. Then I spent a couple of years in the Justice Department arguing cases in the Supreme Court, Solicitor General's office. I loved arguing cases. You stand up there, you got 9 votes, you got to get 5 of them into this case. And Frankfurter, Douglas were all on the court at that time, and Black. And I remember one time, the first case I had, they were beating me over everybody asked a question except Justice Burton. And they all were pressing me on questions, and I want to turn to the statute of limitations. Nobody could win the case. I want to say the government had no authority, but that's what the Army wanted me to say for them. But I had to get the statute of limitations in there. And the case went on for 1 hour. And finally the yellow light comes on, meaning sit down, get ready to sit down. The red light means sit down.
Right.
The yellow light means your time is running out. And they kept asking questions. And the red light came on, and I stopped, and they stopped. And I hadn't mentioned the one issue in this case that we could win on, the statute of limitations, because of questions. And I stood up, and I knew the rules were sit down when the red light comes on, but I didn't dare sit down. I knew of a motion that the prior Solicitor General made. He said, "The Chief Justice, I see my time has expired. I'd like to ask for an additional 5 minutes in which to make the important point of et cetera, et cetera." Motion denied. I didn't dare do that, so I sat there quietly for about 30 seconds, like this total silence. And Justice Burton, God rest his soul, said, "Mr. Fisher, excuse me keeping you, but is there an issue in this case about the statute of limitations?" I said I could have kissed him, my colleague. He said, "I was in the courtroom. I thought you did."
So your case was saved by the judge.
We saved the case by the question.
There you go. There you go.
I won the case on that ground.
Well, early on then, you learned about how to connect with people.
Well, you're trying to keep attached.
That's right. Yeah.
Touch base.
Yeah.
Even with Justice Frankfurter, he'd known my father, and he was rather tough on me sometimes. And the first case I had to argue was about whether Jim Turley had stolen a car when he'd rented a car, drove it across the state line, and sold it. Now, in common law, he would have embezzled the car. Loans was not taken via armas. And I was getting my striped trousers on, morning coat, and John Davis comes in and says, "What do you have for FF this morning?" I said, "No, usual statutory interpretation." "Oh, no. He used to teach criminal law. You got to be careful. He's going to put you right back. Was this car stolen?" And I said, "Oh, my God, thanks. I'm getting my striped trousers, my morning coat. You're asking me to get a new argument." He said, "I'll find something for you." So they got taken to the Supreme Court. He handed me some notes. And here was a case I could not use to start with. You could never argue. But if Frankfurt started asking me, I could use this argument. So I get up there, and before I say a word, Justice Frankfurt said, "Mr. Fisher, tell me, at common law, would this car have been stolen?" I said, "It would not have been taken by larceny." But he said, "But steal means taken erroneously." And I said, "Your Honor, the first usage I could find of the word steal is an obscure commentator on the 12th chapter of John who said, 'Judas bare the purse and stole of that which was given to Christ,' a clear case of embezzlement. Steal does not mean taken like that." And Frankfurt was so cross, he spun his chair around, and I got 8 grins from the court and 1 back of a chair. He won the case.
Quoting scripture, very useful, very useful. But now this is interesting. You've given me a hold here. You love to argue cases in court.
Yeah.
Now this seems to be an interesting and propitious beginning for somebody who's going to be ultimately known as the premier negotiator.
Well, first as a teacher. Teachers talks a lot too at the Harvard Law School and the faculty there at the law school.
Yeah. But at that time, negotiation was not widely used.
No, it was never taught anywhere.
Okay. All right.
It was just...
All right. Why not, do you think?
Well,
I mean, as you look back on it historically, why was it
adversarial
not?
bargaining with some competitor over goods you're buying and selling something, you're arguing over price.
But from the time of Lincoln and others, I mean, certainly there's a rich history of lawyers and people from, most people think lawyers know how to negotiate and that they're taught to negotiate in law school. And of course, as we know, it's only a very recent vintage that there's even formal teaching of that.
I think Harvard was the first course, maybe Michigan had one, on teaching negotiation to lawyers.
But why not? I mean, it's curious. Have you ever thought about why, even though historically, well before that time when you were there and practicing in front of Judge Frankfurter, that there was very little attention paid to negotiation, even though that's what lawyers did most of the time?
That's true, but it was thought that people can do that automatically. Don't need any training on it. And you just automatically do that. And one thing about getting to yes, this first book we had on negotiation, it was advice to negotiators on both sides simultaneously. And prior books have been how do you bluff, how do you mislead, how do you keep your cards close to your chest, how do you advice to one side, coaching somebody on
that was the view of negotiation, was trickery and deceit.
Trickery, deception, a little bit of conniving, avoiding issues, not talking about some person.
And so getting to yes then set the frame of a different view of negotiation
it's
than the
advice
historical.
And it was advice to both sides of how you can negotiate together
And do it
to
rationally,
reach
thoughtfully.
agreement without giving in, not by backing down on my side or backing down on your side, but
Okay.
how do we work together and reach agreement?
Yes. Do you feel, though, that as you look back, if you were looking at getting to yes, and let me just move directly to, I'm quite curious, getting to yes is and remains a very, very important foundational piece for how to begin to think about negotiations in a different way.
It's a very simple book.
Very straightforward. If you were writing it today, as you reflect on it, and maybe that's what much of your writing has been since then, but how would you write it differently?
I don't know. I've thought a little about, they've asked me to bring out a second edition, another new edition to keep it going. And I would say, what would I say differently? A little bit more on they try to invent jointly some answer, working together to be creative on it. Not just having a proposal, but having us develop a proposal together, us work on that, try to include a little more joint problem solving in it, get a little more coherence, togetherness, working together on that. It's like but it's done fairly well.
Well, clearly, and I'm not sure that on that level. Yeah, and your thinking clearly has moved beyond that, and as the new book would indicate, beyond reason, with really emphasizing far more the importance of emotion. And
yeah,
we'll talk
we got the emotions. We got a little bit more on the chapter on what, for example, the importance of expressing appreciation.
Right.
I never had that on, but the first thing is, if I appreciate you, thank you for having me here, thank you for inviting me, thank you for leading with the questions. You can't help but enjoy that. You can't help but like to be appreciation. Build affiliation. The two of us are working together on that, trying to get that thing. I'm going to respect your autonomy. Ask whatever questions you want. I'm not going to impinge on you. And then don't compete over status. Acknowledge you know more about some things than I do. I know more about other things than I do. We each have a lofty status in some area. That's fine. And then on choosing a fulfilling role, a role that is satisfying. One role I can always add to your role by saying, I want your advice.
Yes.
Give me your advice on that. How do I?
Well, here's what I want your advice on. When you were at Harvard and you came to Harvard, it was not, my guess is, and I want to be, that's what I want to know, and you're one of the few who can tell me, it was not a viable, clear field of endeavor to have a law professor studying negotiation.
No,
you were supposed to be in international law, in contracts, and torts, and criminal law, and you chose to focus on negotiation. Why? And what was the resistance? Was there any resistance from your fellow faculty?
I gave a small seminar. You can teach a seminar on anything you want to teach, so you can start with a small course on that.
Yes.
And I didn't really have an idea of making that a book in the field and all that as much as joint problem solving. How do we do this? How do we talk to each other? How do we listen enough? How do we create it? Is there an area in which we can work together, whatever our differences may be? And that's how I got built.
What did you observe in the world as how you saw things being done that made it clear to you that we really need to do some things different? And what were the events that you think that developed
I don't
this?
back off and think about the world. I think about, do I have something worth saying on this thing? Do I have some idea that is worth talking about, is worth having some views on? And I think that the lawyers spend a lot of time negotiating, talking and listening.
Most of their time.
Certainly more than litigating.
Yes.
Litigating is a specialty. Even I was called on jury duty on Monday of this week, and was out in Lowell, sitting around waiting to be called for a jury. And there was a case upstairs where the lawyers were trying to settle it, and knowing that if they didn't, we were a jury waiting to get called up to do it. And they came down and told us finally they've settled their case. But that the people, if as long as you're negotiating, you have some control over the case.
Yes.
Goes to the jury, it's out of your control.
Yes.
So they're trying to settle if they can.
When you were writing Getting to Yes back in the late 70s, and it came out in 1981, and I'm certain that you had been formulating. You first taught a seminar at Harvard where, in the 60s, 70s?
Went back, a freshman seminar and then a law school seminar.
Okay. Did you envision an entire field of conflict resolution growing up?
We're trying to understand the problems of why, and the negotiation was not thought of as this way. Of course, you negotiate all the time. Negotiate with your parents, your children, your spouse. But it was. I thought I could give advice to both negotiators as to how they ought to do it. Less talking at them and more understanding where they're coming from, getting them to tell you their interests, and then more joint inventing of what's a creative option we might work on together. How might we deal with this jointly?
But lawyers, though, it seemed to me, from my sense, and especially, forgive me, at Harvard, would have thought cases are about facts and being tough on the problems. And here you come in and you're talking about joint problem solving in some measure or form, or being collaborative. How were you received? I mean, was there resistance to that notion?
The students were taught advocacy. There was a moot court competition. They were pretending they were lawyers litigating a case. And but most cases are settled.
Well, I do appreciate that. But do you think you were known as crazy Roger Fisher?
No.
You weren't. So the ideas were well received.
Excuse me?
Odd. Tell me odd. Why do you think you were seen initially as odd?
The law has been thought of as the rules of the game.
Okay.
And people are learning towards the rules about committing a wrongful act, negligence, and criminal law about committing crimes, and contract law about making promises, and trust law about setting up legal arrangements, and property law about the laws of property that you're doing. And but what lawyers do most of the time is listen and talk to each other.
Yes.
And there was no course on that.
Okay.
So we got to develop some seminar work first and got negotiation going. Okay.
About what they really do. About what they really do most of the time.
What they really do a lot of the time when they're not litigating.
And so it sounds like then you felt that people did see a clear connection, and that you moved from being odd to being, this is important.
I think that's
this
right.
is core, huh?
I think that's right. I think if people realized law school and other law schools, people began to focus on the negotiation process.
What do you think, as you look back now on some 40, for you, 50 years of dedicating yourself to having lawyers and others, for that matter, business people, heads of countries, thinking about a new way or a different way of negotiating issues?
Well, they've always negotiated, but it's more, there is some useful advice for everybody.
Intentional, conscious, focused.
You can ask questions, you can understand where they're coming from, understand their interests, appreciate their point of view, accept their point of view, and now how do we work together on this with your ideas and my ideas? We do it. So it's just becoming more clearly understanding what lawyers did all the time.
Yes. And what people do all the time.
That's right.
I mean, politicians and
families
and heads of corporations, and all of us. Yeah. What is it that, as you're thinking then back, that gives you, if you still were to say, looking out on how people have used your work or negotiate, gives you concern? In other words, they still don't seem to get it as you look at the political situation in their negotiation.
There's a great deal of assumption of adversariness. Lawyers have a client. They come at it, they're arguing. If they go to court, they're arguing. So there's assumption to emphasize the differences we have, and not the process for dealing with those differences.
Yes.
One process, of course, is litigation, but another process is understanding and talking and exploring how we can work on this together, how we can do that. And that is...
That's the culture, though, isn't it? Isn't it our culture that, you know, to test in that crucible of the
Well, it's partly
competition, that argument?
But the difficulty is we have a client that comes in and says,
Yes.
I want you to represent me on this, and I'm having a problem
Yes.
with this here. So
Yes.
right away you're focusing on one side. And you would think, being a lawyer, well, we can sue them, we'll go for damages, we'll go for injunction, we'll do this and do that. And there's less automatic concern of, let me put myself in their shoes and understand their side of the case.
How would you change? What would you do if you were to encourage a shift in that culture that seems to be,
Well, I think
Deborah Tannen talked about it as the argument culture. How would you shift it so that it was not as adversarial?
Well, I think lawyers are automatically shifting. I remember once when I had a client in California who was very upset, and I was going to be in California anyway, so I met with him there. And he started telling me, I knew about the case a little bit, I'd looked into it. He started telling one side of the case. And I said, I understand your side pretty clearly. Now, would you get out and sit in that chair over there and tell me how the other person sees it? He says, he's a damn fool. And I said, well, just tell me how he sees the case. And he started very accurately getting into the role. I got him enrolled a little bit. I said, now, you've been run over by this big company. You've been pushed back, and they're suing you and claiming the patent is theirs and invalid and so forth and so forth. I got him one side of the plaintiff, getting him feeling the other side of the plaintiff's point of view.
The operative word is feeling.
Feeling. Felt what it was like. And I got him talking about that, feeling like it. And it was very satisfying to see. And he said, after a while, he said, let me out of this chair. I'd rather be over there. It's more fun being over there than
That's right.
feeling how he feels it.
And what did you say to him when he said he wants to be out of the
I
chair?
said, now, you hear what he said? Did you hear what he said?
Okay. Okay.
He said, yes. I said, that's the way he sees it.
All right.
He sees it that way? He doesn't really see it that way, does he? And I said, yes. We got a problem. But his first time he'd really gotten into the role of the other side and began to understand how he could feel, how he could see the case.
So from your view, that's the only time that you can actually really hope to begin a negotiation.
You have to get them to understand the other points. You want them to understand, not just argue it, but...
But I'm curious, when I took trial advocacy, I was certainly taught to understand and to think about the other side of the case. It sounds like you're asking for something more, though, than merely understanding the other side of the case, but to actually sense it, feel it.
If you're simply understanding it in order to argue with it,
Yes.
you're answering arguments with arguments, you're going forward.
Okay.
If you ask everyone at Covington and Burling, where I practiced for a number of years, Gary Gazelle had a client come into the office and took on the case, and he sent the client on his way. He took in 2 or 3 young lawyers with him and said, here's the case. We're representing the plaintiff in this case. Go to the library for a couple of days and find all the arguments the plaintiff has, and look at the cases, and here's the cases. The newspapers already were taking the... So they went off, or they came back in and said, oh, Gary, you can't lose this case. The plaintiff's got wonderful arguments. He's got this and this and this and this. Gary said, that's fine. Thank you. It's really the defendant who hired us. He said, no. You've seen the plaintiff's side of the case. Now go get the library's other side of the case. He said, we have no case to stand on. Don't worry, you'll talk yourself into it very quickly, but I want you to see the other side of the case before we got absorbed. That's very important, to really understand the opposing case. Not just, I hear their arguments, but I can feel how they feel aggrieved and how they're working on it.
Yeah. It's an interesting phenomenon. I mean, you're actually talking about how you can you actually have yourself move and shift yourself in terms of your own focus. I am curious, though, in getting to yes, the chapter on separating people from the problem. And I've always been troubled by that because
it's a troublesome thing. You have to do both. You have to realize that the people have a problem and that they really see it that way. But then you have to deal with the human dimension independent of their particular point of view. Do they feel hurt? Do they feel aggrieved? Are they angry? Are they upset? And so it's both ways. The people are mixed up with the problem, but the problem is separate from the people problem. There's a legal problem or a intellectual problem, but there's a human problem of being angry and being cross.
And what I'm assuming then is, though, that on some level you don't get to the problem you may be in the room to talk about unless or until you've on some level considered the human problem, the relationship problem.
The people have a relationship problem. And one of the critical things is building rapport. I remember in South Africa when I was meeting with the African National Congress, and Cyril Ramaphosa, Secretary General, I'd done a workshop for the cabinet. I was going to do a workshop for them, and it was canceled. And I went down to his office in Johannesburg, and I talked to him a while and got to know him a while, and they set the workshop up again. Did a workshop, and I said, Cyril, had lunch with him on the Saturday afterwards. I said, why did you cancel that workshop? He said, nobody knew you. I said, you know all about me. In fact, you wrote me at Harvard, asked if I get you a fellowship there at one time. Remember, you know all about me. You checked me out. Oh, I knew about you, he said. I never touched you. I never seen your eyes. I never felt you. I never heard your voice. I didn't know who you were. And that's so African. That's so un-American. Un-American. We look at the resume and
that's right.
No, these people they wanted to say, no, I touched you. I felt you. I saw your eyes. I heard what you said. And I've learned a lot from that. The fact that most of the world cares more about the human being than about the resume or about the.
Do you the work that you did in getting to yes and the basic principled negotiation concept? Do you think it has universal application, or is it culturally bound on some level?
We tried in that book to put advice that would be useful for people in international conflicts and in human conflicts. Try to sort out the elements of interests, options, standards that are out there, relationship, communication. Some of the issues are common across the board and that are applied. Now, that doesn't say everybody's the same.
Yes.
But if I'm trying to check you out, or I'm trying to think, what are you worried about, Robert? What's going on here? I'll say, is he worried? Is his head? Is he worried? Is that human rapport he's worried about? Is he worried about what's not getting ahead objectives? What's it? So there's a quality that we all have, independent of our personality. Yeah,
those separate, very personal rituals of negotiation, separate and apart from the analysis.
Well, there's the analysis, but negotiation has I'd like to make it as human as we can, not treat it as this is a formal negotiation. Let me get set and carry on this negotiation. I want people working together and sitting side by side, colleagues. Let's get this problem on the table and see what we can do about it. What do you object to my client's doing? What do you object to my doing? What is it?
If there were, I am curious, and why I was particularly struck in your involvement with the Iranian hostage situation back in 1981, and obviously what we're dealing with now in the world, the geopolitics, is the terrorist threats. How does what you're doing in terms of negotiation apply in those contexts? In other words, in going into Iraq, there were many who would say, there is no negotiation with this guy. Can you negotiate with terrorists, I guess, is the core of my question.
But George Bush has said, don't negotiate with bad people. I'd much rather negotiate than fight. And partly my World War II experience in the war, and partly the feeling that you really want to understand the people. I'd rather talk to find. So I'll talk with anybody. My personal security, I'm not going to walk into a group of hijackers.
What would you say to those folks who would call you a naive dupe? Who would say, you can't take somebody like Osama bin Laden and sit down and talk with them?
Well, it may be not, but there's somebody you can talk to. I'm not sure of Osama, but I would certainly want to listen to him. I learn much more by listening than I do by judging him from a distance. I learn much more. The Ayatollah Beheshti, getting to talk with him in Iran, getting it. We talked by telephone for a long time and got to know him. I said, what do you want? What do you care about? What are you interested in? Let's talk about that. And I had students over there introduce me to him, sort of. So he knew who was someone, although I was working for the United States, I was somewhat independent character, professor, I could do things. But I would like, I think people who think they can judge a terrorist without, they know lump all terrorists together. These are human beings too. I want to get them, I want to listen to them. I want to find out what made them so angry. What are they doing? Why are they?
And to those that would say, but you give them, by even being willing to listen, you give them credibility or give them some position.
I learn more than is worth it. I learn a lot about what they care about. And frequently they got a lot of legitimate grievances. And they may package them up in political extreme terms. But they're not going to win a war. They can raise hell. But if you understand them, I think the Palestinians, talking with them, getting the Israelis and Palestinians to talk to each other. We've got coming this week in Cambridge, we've got a group of Israelis and Palestinians called the Israeli IPLNP, the Israeli Palestinian Negotiating Partners. There are people who've negotiated. Then we meet in Cambridge here and sit side by side at the table, trying to figure out what to do. They understand each other better if they're not just stating negotiating positions, but understanding them as human beings. Why are they upset? How do they feel mistreated? How do they feel ignored? What they're going on? And people lump all Israelis in one category and all Palestinians in another.
Right.
There's a greater variety within them. There is.
Right. Always a risk. Yes.
You're lumping them together.
Yeah.
There are many more.
Yeah. But I'm curious. All of your work from the earliest days have been in geopolitical, international kind of conflict, and yet your work has been taken and applied to what you do at home with your spouse and your children, and in employment settings, and in every other context. Is it really the same? In other words, negotiating between a president and two presidents in an international situation, and negotiating between two people in a household?
The danger of two presidents talking is they both have their positions. If they say something, it's a commitment. If the president says okay, that's a big deal. And when I'm doing international, I much prefer to not have authority. I much prefer to make exploratory discussions with someone on the other side. So I can say, look, I've got all the government's views on this.
Yes.
I've talked with them, but I'd like your thinking of how we come up with a recommendation we might both make to some second-level person on the other side. And there you don't have the danger that anything you say is going to be an official commitment. We're exploring possibilities.
Don't you have the same danger when you're dealing with a husband and wife? Isn't it exactly the same dynamic?
Yeah, if you're the principal yourself. But even then, I want to separate. Let's discuss what we might do. Let's brainstorm for a while, consider possibilities.
Okay.
If we're going to go out tonight, where might we go?
Yes.
What theater we do? Let's just not argue over this theater or that program or this movie or that dinner. let's consider the possibilities. So I separate inventing from deciding. Even there, I try to separate the brainstorming.
Okay, but it's very much the same dynamic, though. I guess my question goes more to not what you're doing, but the similarity between the negotiating behavior that you would do at the highest, seemingly most significant levels, international disputes, and what you do day to day.
The issues are the same. You can separate the ideas and the interests
Yes.
from developing some options and possibilities.
Okay.
And can you separate developing the possibilities from making a commitment,
Okay.
an agreement, what this we're going to do, this we're not going to do.
Right.
And that process is the same at every level.
Yes.
You want to find out what they care about,
Right.
the interests are, generate some options that we might do about it,
Yes.
and only then
Yes.
pick among the options and make a decision.
All right. Now I'm going to ask you one of a series of somewhat unfair questions.
Go ahead, shoot.
All right. Good. Good. I want to know if you practice this stuff at home.
Oh, my wife and I all the time, don't try it on me. She's got, no.
Okay. I want to know if it's the same in your house as it is in mine.
Yes, you have to have it. But it's useful to say, let's consider options before we make commitments.
Okay.
Before I say, argue this thing to do, no, let's just brainstorm some possibilities.
All right. The next unfair question. I'm sure you observe what's going on. If you were giving advice to President Bush or Condoleezza Rice about how they are doing and conducting their negotiations, what would you tell them? Are you pleased with them and what they're doing? And if so, why? And if not, what is it that troubles you about how they approach their negotiations?
I think the President has the view, as far as I can tell, he has the view that he is the most important person in the world, and he decides what he wants, and he tells people, our position with Japan is this, our position is that. I think he starts too early with the answer. I would much prefer he's listening to the Japanese or listening to the Chinese or listening to the other Americans, getting some ideas from them, listening to some senators about what they think before saying, here's my answer to that question. He treats, as a decider, he's too quick to make a decision rather than getting enough consultation, enough advice early on, and being open to exploring ideas, I think. And I don't know Condoleezza Rice as much. She seems to also have a U.S. view. I'm expressing you, the United States thinks this, and not, I've got some ideas, before we formulate a decision, let's try and brainstorm a little bit.
So if I were to infer from that is one of the most important pieces that negotiators might do is, while they might want to think about the range of what they'd like to see come out of things, don't move too quickly to what it is you must have, and get too solid too quick.
Your concerns are known, and then some options that might come out of an agreement. But don't lock into the only answer is this. This is what it has to be. I have decided this is what need to be done. I think that's too early. That, as a political matter, it excludes the other side from feeling participation. If George Bush says, I've decided what we ought to do, China is this, and even if they think it's all right, it'd be much better to hear them first and talk a little bit and then say, what do you think of something like this? We're leaning toward this, or that makes sense. Get them to participate in making the decision, if you can.
Help me with this. One of the most troubling pieces that I have as a negotiator is I'd love to sit down and talk or listen, but the other side says, we're not gonna, and in fact does some dirty trick. And how do you then, what is your advice then for a negotiator when in fact you question the good faith of the other side?
Find out by intermediaries, by the ambassadors, find out from someone else what's bugging them, what's worrying them, why are they taking that position. You have to find out their concerns, and often at the top level they don't want to tell you their concerns, they tell you their position. But to deal with their interests. You want to understand where they're coming from. And it's not just one unified country. We know there are a lot of variety of views in China, Germany, wherever it may be. And you want to understand that range of their thinking. And then build on that if you can.
So there's no time that you would see that negotiation is not something that you should not try to use?
No, I would try always to at least understand. I wouldn't walk in, I wouldn't suggest that the president decide at the highest level to meet and negotiate. I would have second level people exploring the interest, trying to find out what's going on, coming back and giving a range of things, or having, I've got no authority to commit, but I want some ideas we can get approval of. So it's very useful to separate the creative aspect of decision making from the official commitment. And that's what's helpful to have a president. I have to sell it to the president later on. I have to sell it to him. But don't send him in to start negotiating from scratch. Have some subordinates do that.
So sometimes it may even be appropriate for the president to be giving the message of, we will not negotiate with terrorists, while at the same time you have back channels operating.
Yeah, and I think labeling somebody a terrorist doesn't, you can't win a war against terrorism. You can't end it by just winning a military battle, having a surrender terms that there's always more people out there. So you want to learn as much as we can about the motivation of that group of people, and then see what, if some of them can make a political decision that'll cut down, leave the minority in a less potent view, less potent constituency.
In your quite distinguished career, if you were to look at the 1, 2, 3 people that are the best negotiators that you always enjoy watching them work, and have appreciated their approach and how they, and as effective as they were, who might they be? Who would you look to?
Well, I don't know. A lot of George Ball was famous, but he had a lot of discussions that never made the light of day. I mean, he didn't know what was going on very much.
Give us some background on George Ball.
Well, he was Undersecretary of State for a long time.
Okay.
And he was a lawyer in New York, I think. And he was, but Dean Acheson, whom I knew fairly well, Secretary of State, I knew him when he's back at the law firm in Washington, there working with them. I had great admiration for him.
What did he do that you most intrigued you?
Well, when you get to know him personally, when you're working in his office, I came down sometimes. He was on a committee picking new lawyers to be hired by the firm. He called me, and the committee was meeting in his office. They called me in the law firm office there. He said, "What do you know about Jim Grant?" And I said, my brother thinks he's a great guy, and I think he's fine. How long have you known him? I said, well, I've known about him. He said, how long have you known him? I had lunch with him once. He says, that? I said, yes, but he impressed me because you recommend, yes, I recommend he come here because he seems to have qualities. You had him once at lunch and you were asking us to consider him. Do you realize his background? I said, well, yes, he's worked with Marshall in China. He did this, he did that. That's all you know about him? Get out. But they hired him anyway. I just was the chairman of that committee, and I knew him. He was open to thinking and opening to ideas. Very personable. Even a junior associate came in, he's always come up behind his desk and sit in a chair over to the side, so he would.
So the characteristics, if you were to identify the characteristics of the best negotiators, they'd be that human ability, that connection ability.
Human rapport, being able to not just have a position, but being able to have a connection with somebody. They actually always get up behind his desk and come to sit in a chair beside you, so we'd talk.
Tell me about this.
Well,
just ask you.
He'd ask you, tell me, what about that? Let's do that. You have ideas on that? And very much a human human level.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I want people who are not just positions and not just titles, but
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of humanity to them.
So there's not a whole lot of room in this field of negotiation for ideologues about how to do it.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
you know, or
All sorts of room.
okay, all right. So
Be an idealist.
Well, okay, being an idealist.
Be an optimist.
All right.
Always try for more than you think you
All
can
right.
get. Be open.
All right.
Be human. Try to build personal rapport with somebody. Trying to make it a human connection. Don't just come in and state your position and tell them their position over there, back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I guess what I'm trying to get at, though, is that the idea that there would be somebody that would come in with, you must do it this way. I mean, whether it's your way or anybody else's way, that there may be as many different ways to effectively negotiate
Yeah,
as there are people.
if you have complete authority and you can decide, then I want to hear your advice before I make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But if he's really talking and wants to learn something, I want to learn something, then you want to keep it open as long as you can. And treat it as one human being with another. You're right there. You're not just one position, another position, colliding.
As you look down, as you look into the future, you have started historically, from my perspective, first time in history in the last 25, 30 years, that as best I can tell, there's been a focused, conscious look at how do we negotiate and bringing it to the surface of saying, how can we be more effective and conscious about that? And you were one of the key people to start that.
I think so, being articulate and giving advice to both negotiators how to do it, and not preparing you for the onslaught or preparing you to deal with somebody else. But what's my advice to the two of us, how we can work together on this? Be open, don't make commitments early, understand, listen, establish some human contact.
And what would you hope for as you look down, as you look out on how this field that you've had so much of a part in creating as it moves forward? What would you hope that it would focus on? Where would you like to see it go to bring this in more fully?
Well, just to recognize that human beings are human beings and be human about it. Get some personal involvement with the people. They're human beings too. Find out what they care about. Explore. And having a process of listening, of trying to understand, of putting myself in your shoes and trying to figure out how I would feel if I were there, what I'd do about it. And work on it. We can do things better together than we can apart. If we can work together on this, that's going to be better. The more we can jointly work on something, let's try and do it that way.
So as a course of study, as a formal course of study, they now have master's degree programs, and they have, in some places, formal courses of study on conflict and negotiation, mediation, and change. Should it be a field separate and apart from everything else that we do as human beings, or should it be?
There's ways we can learn something about the interaction. I don't want them two separate, off to one side, but I think it's a way of being present oneself and understanding there's somebody else, of being human, of being in touch, of trying to appreciate the other person. Try to bring affiliation with them, side by side, understanding they have their autonomy, I've got mine autonomy, you must retain freedom of decision on many things. But we're people, and we can do it together. Alone you can't do much. You can be a monk out in a monastery or solitary, walled pond or somewhere you can think about it, but most of humanity has to work with other people. You want to get good at that. Want to get good at understanding yourself, What do I really care about? Understanding another?
Do you believe two people is as deeply committed as they may be or want to be to wanting to work together when they're coming from very different places can give up their fears, their anxieties, their strategic behavior that is so much a part of being a human being?
That's fairly effective who they are. I'm more optimistic than many people. Many people wear their themselves much more tightly buttoned up there. But I still have to be aware of how you're behaving. And I can be open and recognize you're not being open. I can share ideas and recognize you may not be willing to share ideas. And that gives me a word of caution. But don't get too extended. But I've been misled a couple of times. But I think being optimistic, think the best of the other person is probably they usually are right. You're usually a better person than.
Talk to me, because you come from that period, and I mean this in the most respectful way, but lived through the period, and I've always been fascinated by talking about being misled. Neville Chamberlain, and you know, and it's always struck me.
I thought Chamberlain was right to talk to Hitler, and wrong to trust him.
Okay.
And he came back, and having seen Hitler going into Sudetenland, he then comes back and said, he promised me this. And I would have had him talk to him and say, this guy didn't justify his past behavior at all. He got unable to, I don't think he can be trusted. I don't trust him. But to come back and saying, I met with this bad man, he's agreed on peace in our time. Chamberlain was right to meet him, wrong to ignore his background.
There were clear pieces of behavior that was completely inconsistent with what he said.
What he's now saying today.
So he was being naive, not in talking to him.
Oh, no, that's right. Talking was a wise idea. Believing what he said was a mistake.
All right. Because he could see that the guy was not following through. Yeah.
No.
So wasn't necessarily the feckless appeaser because he would be willing to negotiate, which is what's commonly thought, but is because he was simply not willing to read the writing on the wall.
That's right. No, I think he just. I've talked with anybody. And it just, when the police are called into a holdup, they arrive at the scene, and there's a holdup man with his pistol at the head of the proprietor. The police, they call in their negotiator. He comes in and says, this is going to be, well, like your coffee with creamer. What do you mean by coffee? I can have a cup of coffee. I'll put a cup of coffee on the counter over here. How do you like your coffee? And he's holding a pistol to the head of the proprietor. And he said, look, it's going to take us some time. They're like, okay. Now, you realize if you should shoot that man in the presence of these police and myself, that's first-degree murder. If we should work something out as an attempted armed robbery, I'll tell the judge whether you cooperate or not. So let's just realize there's a shooting in you may think may solve a problem, but it gives you a first-degree murder in front of witnesses, and it's not going to work. So that's the thing. Now tell me, you got a wife? A wife? What's that got to do with it? Well, why are you out robbing a store like this? What do you come out for? Well, she's broke and can't find out for the groceries. Now she's got. That's the, well, look, I can't promise you anything except I'll talk to your wife.
Yes.
I'll find out what the situation is. If there's programs that meet her, I'll see what I can do about that. But I can't. Look, put that gun down, you'll find it better. And so here's a professional negotiator. He's talking with an armed robber with a gun, pointing at the head of the proprietor. And yet he's got a way of talking and listening. And what are you interested in? Look, shoot him at murder. Put the gun down. It's an attempted armed robbery. And I'll find out. Talk to your wife. I'll see what's going on. Let's just be sensible. And you can talk with almost anybody. There's no harm in talking.
Right. Yeah.
But you want to be aware of the real risks.
And yet we always are up against this view that negotiation in our cultural lingo is a sign of weakness. Talking is a sign of weakness.
I'm afraid that's what the presidents bushes indicate that he believes that. I shouldn't talk to these bad people. My experience is talking is much the best way to persuade people.
Yes.
Persuading them with a gun without talking
Yes.
is nowhere near as good as sitting down and talking with them. Now, I met during the Vietnam War, I met with Madame Bin in Paris, and talking about that, and I said, she said, let's talk about the problem. She said, why do you report casualties in the United States? I said, don't you report casualties? No, we don't report any casualties. It's much better. People never hear about it. They stop getting letters. That's where.
Right.
Start talking with her about the problem, and then think, what do you want? How do you got to get out of this thing? But you know, here I was an unofficial American, not just meeting with her in Paris to talk, finding out what's going on. But we established some communication.
It's a beginning.
It's
Some place to talk. Yeah. Yeah.
Listen. The more I can express appreciation, understanding where people are coming from.
Yeah. So your words of advice to folks, to the many people that you've enticed into this field over the years, those coming into the field now, as to what they should do, what they need to focus on to become good negotiators, what would it be? Single most important.
Good at establishing a willingness to listen, establishing forms of communication, separate your position from your human ties, that you're two human beings together with a situation very difficult, but I want to really understand where you're coming from. And be open to listening.
Yes.
Be open to learning.
Good. Roger Fisher, on behalf of mediate.com, I want to thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir. Good.